What'd you say?
I asked how you doing. Are you doing okay? I just launched right into work. I launched right into our work.
That was very New York of you, not Midwest at all.
Yeah,
Midwest,
no,
how's your family? How's it going?
How is your family?
Thank you for asking. Everyone's well. Yeah, middle kid is now launched to Seattle, so he lives there now. Tried to put together his bed frame last night. Got a lot of texts about it must be defective because he couldn't do it. And then he figured it out. That was great.
Look at
I know, growing up.
Look at that. That's awesome.
Well, I want to ask you how you're doing. Last night you sent me a picture of your son and his cars. But before we do that, I do want to say welcome to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman. I'm here with my co-host and commentator, Jamie Almanzán. Okay, so you had this whole picture of the lining up of cars. Oh my God, I could totally relate to that.
Yes. He is in such a Monster Jam phase. I don't know. It didn't exist for my eldest, or it did, but I don't think it was as big of a thing. I don't know. Maybe it just wasn't for him. But so watching real Monster Jam, watching videos that other people make of Monster Jam.
I love it.
Watching kids play with the Monster Jam trucks like he plays with the Monster Jam truck.
Yeah.
All of that. And then it inspires him. He'll watch for maybe 5-10 minutes sometimes. Then he turns it off, goes running outside to recreate the thing that he saw. I really loved it. And he had a whole plan.
I'm going to say it right here. It's like father and son, because I know you always have a plan as we're doing this podcast together, and you always have a really interesting question to ask. So, okay, hit me.
What aspect of your identity have you grown to better understand, talk about, or live in that was harder for you as a kid?
I like that question. Although as a former superintendent or recovering superintendent, I'm getting a politician answer the way I want to answer this question. My parents wanted me to learn an instrument. And I remember my mother taking me to learn violin, Suzuki violin. So we get this 3/4 size violin, and I've taken it home and I'm trying it out, and it sounds terrible. It just sounds terrible, as you might expect. I don't know how to play the violin. And so I go and find my father's toolbox, and I decide that there must be something wrong with it. I better fix it. And so I dismantled the entire violin. And I remember my mother walking in and seeing just fully deconstructed violin. I'd be like, what are you doing?
Oh my goodness.
And so I learned the clarinet. And the clarinet led me to the saxophone, and I did some vocal music. And in high school, I took 4 music classes, and it really became a big part of my identity. And I attribute it to my ability to set individual goals and collective goals, because when you're a part of something like a musical group, an ensemble of some sort, you have to take direction from a director. You have to know your part. You have to harmonize with others and know that you are not forcing your part over somebody else's. You have to know when you're the melody and you're the support. It really is a metaphor for leadership. And I would say throughout my entire life, I have drawn on those experiences, and all these years where I hadn't played my instrument have now rejoined an ensemble and a band, and feel so comfortable and so connected. But yet the values that I learned from it were totally apparent, and then now have been doing again in a different way. How would you have answered that question?
What a good answer. The question came from our guest today, Deb Smith, and her story and how she started in the interview, telling her story about her racial identity and growing up in Lander. And I could see her coming to her own voice, her own understanding of who she is, a part of her identity that she was figuring out, and going through all these experiences, both positive and negative, that creates the person that she is today. I can relate to her identity story, her racial identity story. And I also connect it to, because I can connect it to hobbies that started out as hobbies and now are a part of who I am. I asked the question about that part of your identity that has grown. You basically gotten confidence in your musical identity. Over time, it has become more and more a part of it, to the point where I think we often say that I need to be confident enough to be humble in the space. So confidence does give me an ego boost, but the ego isn't there to dominate the space, but rather the purpose isn't for your voice to be it's to find your voice and then realize that there are plenty of other people that have better ways of thinking about it than you, and that they have even more and maybe didn't get the opportunity to develop the confidence and aren't in the space, but they are brilliant. And when I think of that idea, this kind of quiet leadership, I think of our guest, Deb Smith. That was what the interview felt like to me. She found her voice. She has confidence in her voice to be able to ask for help, to consider everyone in the community as she makes a decision. She doesn't make it alone. And so with that, turn it over to your interview with Deb Smith.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Deb Smith. Deb is beginning her 5th year as superintendent of the Fort Washakie schools in the Fremont School District, number 21, on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, and her 13th year in the district. Her school district has approximately 500 students from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, and of her many recognitions, I want to note that Deb has been featured in the Wyoming Association of School Administrators Women Leaders series. Deb, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I'm really thrilled to have you. I learned about you from Voice for Equity, an organization founded by Dr. Kishimoto. If I were to offer an abbreviated history, this is what I learned about you. You are a member of the Eastern Shoshone Tribe and also a descendant of the Northern Arapaho Tribe as well. You grew up on and off reservation land. Your mother worked at the Tribal Head Start program. She's also an enrolled member. And growing up, you lived on the reservation when you were really young and then moved to Lander about 15 miles away. And that's because your dad's work was 60 miles away from Lander, but it was closer for him to drive back and forth to work every day. Would you talk a little bit about that experience and the importance of finding support groups like Keepers of the Fire when you were in college and Voice for Equity as a professional? So I'm really interested in talking a little bit about that, your experiences in identifying and finding those supports.
Growing up on and off the reservation, I attended schools in Lander, which is a really small rural town in Wyoming, and 15 miles adjacent to the Wind River Indian Reservation. A lot of my classmates were predominantly white. There were very few Indians going to school in town. And so growing up as a minority in Lander in very rural Wyoming is difficult. And growing up with a non-Indian father and an Indian mother is difficult because, one, I'm very light-skinned. And for me, I could be accepted into the white community until people realized I was Indian. And then I felt discrimination. With my light skin on the Indian side or the native side, I was discriminated against because I looked white and I wasn't considered Indian enough because of my lightness. And it was hard. So I grew up very tough skin, very shy because I wasn't sure if what I had to say people were going to listen, because I was often looked down upon. I'm also the youngest of 2 sisters, and my older sisters are very confident and very outspoken. And I think I just had that ingrained in me that I wasn't one to speak my mind openly unless there was somebody younger than me, and then I had to speak up for them. And that's also, I think, a traditional way of growing up. Our family, my mom's side, she has 13 siblings. So our extended family was huge and we're very close. And having that community with that support and then going to live off the reservation and attend a non-native school was hard. And then when you make friends, the other kids were nice and everything, but there's still that distinct line that you're Indian. There's something different about you. And that was hard. And so I adapted to that. I was shy, not knowing whether to trust my gut on things or raise my hand at times in the classroom because I didn't want to embarrass myself or embarrass my family if I didn't know something. I didn't want them to think, oh yeah, she's dumb or she doesn't know things. But as I got older, I realized that I needed to speak up and I needed to be the one to say things because there wasn't that many students that would. And my mom is a very strong woman, a very proud woman. And she would always tell us, when you are walking into school, you hold your head up high because you need to be proud of who you are and where you come from. And it was hard for me to accept because generally in our culture, women don't speak up. It's pretty male dominated, and out of respect, you don't talk back to your elders. You don't talk back to men, regardless if they're younger or older. My older sister tried to go to college, but ended up coming back after, I think, a few months. She didn't make it quite a semester. And then my older sister, that's 2 years older than me, went to community college, but didn't finish. So I was probably the first that was really going to go to a 4-year college. And so I followed my friends to the University of Wyoming, and I didn't know anything really. I didn't know that, what to do with tuition, and it was hard because it was away from home, away from not just my mom and dad and my siblings, but my whole family, my whole network. The first time that when I left college, I drove off and I had forgotten something. So I went back to the house and my mom was in the kitchen sitting at the table and she was crying. And I said, "Mom, what's wrong?" And because I'd only seen my mom cry at funerals. And so I said, "Oh no, what happened? Is grandma okay?" And everything. And she was crying because I was leaving. And she said, I'm really happy. I'm really proud of you that you're going. She said, "But I'm just sad." She said, "Yes, you have to go. This is what you need to do. You need to go." And that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, was to walk back out the door and get in my vehicle and leave. I was like a fish out of water. It was hard to adjust. And so the more active I was in keepers, the better I felt connected down there. When other students would come from the reservation there, I would talk with them and ask them how they were doing and make sure that they knew that they had support. We look out for each other when we were down there, just because it's very hard. But I knew that I needed to finish.
That is an amazing recollection of your time growing up, legitimately feeling isolated because you are, in terms of biracial, bicultural, no doubt some feelings of imposter syndrome in terms of what am I doing here and do I belong here kind of thing. And then having opportunity to go to college, walking back, seeing your mom, who is this presence of strength, and seeing this moment of vulnerability from her, and for her to know that there were going to be opportunities. She really reminds me of this grandmother in this one of my favorite books that I used to read with my third graders called The Most Beautiful Place on Earth. It takes place in Guatemala. And there's this child who is wildly smart and ready to go to school. And he doesn't know why his grandmother isn't advocating for him. And he finally says, "Grandma, why can't I go to school?" And she says, "You're not old enough." And she says, "I am. And I can read." And but I was too afraid to tell you. And the grandmother says, "Too afraid to tell me? It's when something is so important, that's when you must say it." And I just got the sense of your mother saying to you, when it is so important, if it is about making change within the politics hierarchy on the reservation, and while respecting cultural norms, but also taking some appropriate steps to say, and I imagine you feel that way as a leader, as a superintendent in your community. So I wanted to ask about that in particular. How has working in your community been positive for the children you get to support, knowing you've learned so much from this work?
I think one of the ways that it's been a positive experience for myself as well as the students here is because I truly think of our community as my extended family. A lot of the students that go here I'm related to. Either they are my cousins' kids or people that I've grown up with, close friends, their kids and their grandkids. And I always keep that in mind, that I want the best that we can provide for all of our students. And I always view them as my kids.
If you're just joining us, our guest today is Deb Smith, Superintendent of the Fort Washakie Schools in the Fremont School District number 21 on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. Now, I want to come back to this work of collective wisdom. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. It's this idea of harvesting the collective wisdom, and it's exactly as the term suggests. It speaks to really listening to the many perspectives to make the very best decision for children. So, would you share some ways that you've done that you've learned to harvest that collective wisdom in Fort Washakie?
One of the things I do when I am thinking about a decision or just working is I try and think what our community needs are. And I look at what are our kids doing? What are their parents needing? What are their grandparents? We have a lot of elders in our community. And I guess that's what I think first about what our community needs are. How would an elder view this? How do I go about this in a respectful way? We have a lot of things come and go here on the reservation. And it seems some things, people have really good ideas, but it's not as well planned for sustaining. And okay, if this group comes in and they're going to help and they want to do all this fun stuff, what's going to happen when they have to leave and go back? Is that just going to end? Are we going to have all this?
School gardens come to mind.
So I think about that, like with the decisions that we make here, is it in the best interest of kids or is it in the best interest of adults? Because right now we have to think the best interest of our kids. We need to think about their needs, and some of their needs are very immediate. Do they have enough food? Do they have warm clothes? Do they have someone to stay with? Do they have transportation besides the school bus? We need to find out what's going on with our kiddos, what supports their families need, and get those going. And then let's look at the academic part. Once our basic needs are covered, then we can start looking at what can we do to improve our test scores. I really have a hard time with the standardized testing and things like that. I know that's important, but we're always getting hit.
You don't get credit for how resilient a child is, right? In some cases, what they have been able to overcome just to get to school, make it through the day and be successful, or to have built some new friendships, or you don't get credit for that. I often refer to it as conveyor belt education because it is the last 114 years. The only two institutions that have looked the same are schools and prisons in terms of trying to standardize everything. And yet we know that the world that our children will inherit is going to be radically different than it was for us. I was wondering, you made mention of when harvesting the wisdom of your community, you made a specific point to tribal elders. And I'm curious, in a non-reservation school district, what is typical would be superintendent reports to Board of Education is elected by its community, and that's the relationship. And of course, then there's the external systems of your mayors and your governors and your county supervisors and the community at large and all that. And I'm curious, is it similar? Is it different? Is there a board and a tribal elder council that you are interacting with? And just really fascinated by the hierarchy of the organization.
We have our Shoshone Business Council, and there are 6 elected officials within our tribe. And so our school board and myself, the board chair and myself, meet with the Shoshone Business Council, the SBC, quarterly, and we let them know what's going on with the school. And then we get funding through impact aid. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's because we are on federal lands, because we are on a reservation, we do not have that tax base. And so we get monies based on our student population, our student enrollment, to offset what we would incur for taxes. And in doing that, we have to have tribal consultation. And so the monies that we get, we talk with our tribal councils, both the Shoshone Business Council, which we meet quarterly, and then we also meet with the Intertribal Council, which is the Shoshone Business Council and the Northern Arapaho Business Council. They come together and we meet and let them know what we're doing. And then they sign a form saying they approve how we're going to be spending these impact aid dollars on the education for our students. And then we're allowed these funds. And so that is a big process. When I became the superintendent, of course, was COVID. And for our tribes, it really hit us hard. And I think because I'm a tribal member and a community member, I really knew the significance of what that meant for us. And so we worked very closely with our business councils and our tribal health programs in order to do what was best for our community. And that did not necessarily meet the same expectations with our non-native communities. And so we were in school shut down longer. We were in virtual education first, longer than other schools. We didn't have access to internet for probably 90% of our students compared to the non-native schools that had maybe 10%. So it was a huge learning curve getting those services set up. And then I remember having conversations not only with the tribal councils, but also advocating on behalf of our reservation districts, not just my own, with our state legislators and our Department of Education saying, this doesn't work for us here. This is not how our tribal councils and our tribal communities work. Yes, we're a public school on the reservation, not just a tribal school. But we have tribal kids here and we live in a tribal community. So we're going to be respectful of what is going on in our community. And we're not opening our doors. That was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, was to make those decisions. But also probably one of the best things I've had to do as a leader was to stand firm and say, I'm looking out for our community. And hold true to it. And it was hard.
See, your mom prepped you. Your mom was getting you ready for when it's so important to say, that's when you got to say it. Can I ask you, what does the term an imperfect leader, how does that resonate for you?
I can really relate to that term because I don't think anybody's perfect at all. And I think in order to be a leader, to be a good leader, you have to realize and recognize your imperfections, that you don't know everything. But I do know things, and I do know when to say things and when not to say things. And I'm very passionate about our kids and our school and our community, and I guess rose to the occasion. But I always ask myself, if I don't know the answer, who do I know to ask? I try to let people know that if they want to learn more about something, if they want to become a leader, I'm all about that. And I will help them along the way and we'll learn things together.
It sounds like there are some in your community that you have learned from.
We have a tremendous Shoshone language teacher that works at our high school, and he is one of our community members. I would call him an elder, though he probably would not call himself an elder yet. But he is one of our people that our tribe calls on to do ceremonies and to do funerals and to do blessings. And when we want to get cedared, he's one that we call on. And he'll say prayers for us and things. And he is so knowledgeable. Is he a teacher? No, he does not have that education background. But he's our Shoshone language and culture teacher. And we learn awesome things from him on a daily basis. And he teaches our kids about how to be respectful, how to think in a good way when you're growing up as a young Shoshone boy or a young Shoshone woman, or who the Shoshone women need to talk to at certain times. How to approach non-natives and teach them things that they should know in a respectful way. How to just enjoy being here around Indians and non-Indians and be yourself instead of always having to answer questions or not have a sense of humor. And I don't know, he is so knowledgeable and humble. And when I think about An Imperfect Leader, I think about, okay, what can I learn from him? What would he add?
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action, and my guest is Deb Smith. She's the superintendent of the 4 Washakie schools in the Fremont School District, number 21, on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision they made, and then we discuss it. So, Deb, what happened?
One of the decisions that we made for our district, we do not have a school resource officer. We're very rural, and we would get a part-time SRO with our local tribal police department, which is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA cops. And so we share that officer between our school, which is located on the northwestern side of our reservation, with the school that is our BIA school, and it's clear down on the southeast side of the reservation. So it's about a 45 to 50-minute drive, and it's very hard. So we haven't hired an SRO yet because it's not in our funding model through the state. And we had a conversation with Shoshone Business Council about ways that we could possibly get an SRO. I contacted the Billings area office of the BIA asking, can we advertise? If you hire it, can we have an MOU between your department and our school about funding? We would fund the position, and then you could use the person during the summertime and then when the school breaks and whatnot. So they advertised, but we were still unable to find somebody. And I think it's in part because there's such a shortage of BIA police officers that they didn't want to lose an officer for an SRO position. And so we went back to the drawing board, went back and talked with the SBC about, okay, that's not working out. What can we do? And so we've thought about going through the fish and game department and having a wildlife federal position there because they are considered law enforcement because they enact the tribal law and order code for hunting and fishing. And so we've had those conversations with our Shoshone and Arapaho Fish and Game Department, but we're still trying to see if that is actually going to amount to an actual person. So we had to really think outside the box in order to get this SRO position for our district, and hopefully we will have.
So right now, do you have school security?
We have school security, but the needs for our school safety have increased. And so we would like to have a tribal SRO person here so that our kids could develop a positive relationship with law enforcement, but that it also has a little more teeth in case we have to actually charge kids. Had seen an increase in vape use, an increase in THC type vaping and things like that.
Let me ask you this question. So you want to add an SRO. It sounds like there are obvious reasons for that. And you have to work through the business council and other entities because it isn't just a decision you and your school board can make, because there are monies that are available to you, but they have to go through a process of being approved. And so I'm curious, what might have been some concerns that were brought forward about even putting an SRO into your building? And the reason why I ask that is because so many districts consider SROs, but they also have to consider the disproportionate contact that students of color will have with law enforcement. And what I think I heard you say was there's a piece in there that was really important to you, which is that the individual that you were going to hire was also going to be someone who lives or is a member, because being a member of one of the tribes that are recognized by your community would allow them to not only build meaningful relationships and also enforce laws that might be violated. Am I capturing some of that correctly?
Yes, definitely. In our community, we really would like to have a Native SRO, because that's another way for our kids to see a role model, someone that is doing this type of work in a good way, and that they're not always seeing police as bad or wanting to cause trouble for you if you're just doing everyday things. We have to have more understanding of how to abide by social norms outside the reservation, as well as the social norms within the reservation. And it's hard when you're a Native person, when you're a Native kid going places and things are a little different. You're not really sure how to act, how to react, what to say, what not to say. And certain things are seen maybe as troublesome when really they're not. You could just be goofing around, but people might be offended. And so to have those conversations and to have a person like an SRO kind of understand both sides of the law and what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Okay, you guys are walking down a very thin road here, and this is why you might be seen as aggressive because you have your hoodies up, or because you're walking all together in a group, and kids might not think, oh gosh, that's a thing. Maybe we shouldn't do that, or maybe we should just take the hoods down and let people know we're laughing, we're not doing anything wrong.
Gosh, it sounds so similar to the experiences off reservations as well, in terms of if you are not part of the dominant society, then you have to adjust the way that you experience the world, which is such an incredible disservice to our kids who are just kids, right? Yeah. Particularly if they're laughing, they're not laughing at you, right? They're not, and you know what? They're not even thinking about you. The fact that you think that they're making fun of you. Wow. This is interesting because typically an after-action review is to look back on what has happened, and it sounds like you're still in the process of moving forward with trying to get your SROs. I guess my last question would be, instead of what was something that was good that came out of it, what are you hopeful for, or maybe what are your next steps in terms of making that push for that support for your kids in your district?
I think our next steps are we're going to go back to the Shoshone Business Council and set up a meeting with them and with our tribal fish and game director and say, what do we need to do? I filled out the forms. I've typed letters. I have our attorney looking at the MOU. What more do we need to do to get this position? Because we truly need it. And hopefully it will happen. I'm not going to take no for an answer. So it's been a long time.
Well, then we're going to treat this episode as, I can't wait to get back in touch with you sometime soon to hear the good news that your kids have gotten the support that they need, and that you were really successful in exactly that, harvesting the collective wisdom, bringing your community alongside you, and making the case for the additional support. Deb, I am grateful for your time. Deb Smith, Superintendent of the Fort Washakie Schools in the Fremont County School District number 21 on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. And some of my big takeaways today were, here you were as this young child growing up with a sense of not sure of where you fit in the world. And now I have had just the delight of talking with you and just meeting someone who is so clear on what she wants to achieve with others in the service of the children in your community. And I'm grateful to you. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
And so we're back. And my first question for you, Jamie, is what is something that resonated for you?
This is my 4th episode getting to do this with you, and I am so enthused by it. I love this. And we could have gone down so many other pathways. There's so many things that we didn't talk about.
Here's things that we talked about. I do want to say, though, because obviously we sometimes trade texts before this, and you're like, why didn't you ask this? We could have talked about this. And I'm like, I know it's a 30-minute conversation and you want to explore so much with this incredible leader who has taken on a very important role within and it's very personal, her community, a reservation where she grew up, that she called home, that she left and then has returned to.
You are 100%. I'm like, why didn't Peter ask this? That's silly. Here's what stood out to me from Deb. Her understanding, her rooted decision-making in collective identity. This was profound to me as someone who grew up in a family that was like that. I got told stories like, your first name doesn't matter, your last name does. We love you, but you are part of us. We matter. Almanzans matter, not Jamie.
That's interesting. So that's a story of the collective, right? And if you listen to last week's episode, I believe you talked about arriving in Palo Alto as a family. It was what was good for the collective.
Correct. You could see it. There's all these decisions along the way. When she makes decisions, she says, I try and think about what our community needs are. What are their parents, meaning students? What are their parents needing? This is my favorite one. What do their grandparents need?
Why did that stand out for you?
Because I don't think our American identity considers the family unit related to extended family, to grandparents. That stood out to me. I don't think as superintendents, leaders, we have to consider what the elders think first.
It's interesting to me because when you read organizational textbooks and things like that, sometimes they will refer to the tribal elders. And I don't always get a sense that they mean it in the same way as it was well communicated in the conversation. 100%. Oh, tribal elders, literally meaning those who their lived experiences are valued. And I thought, that's really interesting. In my previous role as a superintendent, we had a sister city in Japan, Hakusan, Japan. And so I led a delegation to Japan to visit our sister city, and we went to visit schools. And I'm laughing because you walk into the school and during the day, kids they all have different jobs and they have to clean the classroom. They have to clean the bathrooms. Mm-hmm. And one of the members of our delegation said, Peter, we need to do this. You need to do that. I said, oh, sure. Yeah. And the moment I mentioned that, you'll be looking for a new superintendent because they will run me out of town. Oh yeah, your kids should be cleaning the bathroom. Throughout the entire time, our group kept saying, look at this. This is amazing. This community, this collective, that it isn't about the one, it's about all of us. And at the same time, as we were describing our system of education, we routinely were told, my gosh, the individuality and the ability to pursue one's individual interests is such an amazing opportunity for children because that's not something that we're allowed to do. And one isn't better. It is certainly interesting, her perspective on the collective making decisions for the community together. That does seem more important than one person making a decision for everybody.
Can I tell a story related to that very idea? So when I graduated from high school, I did not think I'd go to college. I didn't think I was smart enough to go to college. I mean, like college, book smart, school smart, that kind of thing. My cousin was a firefighter. And I'm like, he seems to be making a good living. I'll go do that. Let's see what it takes to become a firefighter. Of course, I have no idea how hard it is to become a firefighter. I just think, that's what I'll go do. My uncle, my mom's, the middle brother, pulls me aside at a dinner and says, you're not going to be a firefighter. You're going to college. You have the grades for college. You're going to college. You're going to college and you can be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant. Feel free to pick amongst those. All of those professions are what's best for us, best for the family, and best for your mother. So the thread that I grew up with, grow up to be anything you want to be. Not true at all. You can't grow up to be anything you want to be. In fact, here are the three choices you have. I went to college because my uncle told me to. I majored in math, thinking accountant, failed calculus, and then went. And it was like, I guess I'm a lawyer. And so I started writing and studying writing and ended up down this pathway around religion and majored and got a degree in religious studies. Didn't want to go to seminary. I wasn't going to be a priest. Now, in my mind, I was like, I don't think that's me. And I ended up going into teaching. It wasn't one of the choices. And so to this day, there's still this line from my uncle about having not chosen one of the things that would have been best. He loves me. He thinks I'm great. He thinks I'm amazing. All the things that make me feel good about me. But the collective identity doesn't allow for very easily individual wants, needs, all that stuff.
I want to put that story in the context of Deb's memory of going back into her house and finding her mother crying.
Yes. She forgot something. She literally got in the car, started to drive to college. Oh, I forgot walked into the house. Yeah. Within a moments of having left.
And her mother is crying. And Mom, what's wrong? Who died? Who's sick? Anybody I can say? No, I'm so happy, but I'm so torn by your departure.
Yes. To the point where you don't leave. We're supposed to be together all the time. Always.
Yeah.
Always. And it comes up as a conflict in my family all the time where my mama will be like, oh, so-and-so's in town. I invited them to your house for dinner. Deb talked about this being related to everybody in the district. I'm like, oh my goodness. That is to me so relatable as an Almanzán. Basically, if your name resembles my name, you're related to me in some way. That's likely. And it's such a stereotype that's true in this case. Oh my God. We're
too funny.
We're all related.
My
mom's inviting them all over for dinner. I have to cook.
So Jamie, here's something. We're thinking about our identities and things like that and the collective versus the individual. And I thought from a superintendent's lens, I thought it was really interesting, her conversation around the SRO issue, the school resource officer. Not as much about the SRO as much as the governance structure that exists. So the federal government intervenes in terms of providing funds because there are not tax revenues available on the reservation. So they have federal monies, and those federal monies have to be adjudicated not just by her school board, but by two other entities, a tribal council, a commerce group. And I thought that was really fascinating in terms of how to negotiate all of that. And to me, it does speak to, this is to continue to perpetuate the collective to some extent. I find it somewhat cumbersome as well. And so I was interested in that. And then I think you and I were chatting offline, and I hadn't thought about this, how incredibly impressed you were or inspired by her thinking differently than a typical school leader might when it comes to, well, this avenue is close to me. I'm going to choose to pursue this other avenue.
I want to speak to the collective cumbersome first. Is it cumbersome? Yes, very. This is one of the reasons why I think people who grew up in collective identity communities find themselves saying, forget this. And they move, they leave, and find themselves then individually being able to make very quick decisions on their own for themselves. But that all sounds great until you reflect on the isolation and the disconnect from a collective identity. And some people build a different new collective identity. Collective identity is cumbersome. I loved her stories about all those things because it's systematized collectivism. So not only is collectivism slow, but now we're going to make it slower by creating these structures for decision making. Oh my goodness gracious. No wonder it took forever. Which is why I loved her innovation. I loved when she said, okay, so if it's not going to happen that way, she went fish and game. And I thought that was so cool because there isn't only one way to do a thing in schools. I think this is how schools tend to get stuck is we keep trying to solve new problems with the same tools like over and over again. And we're not often innovative enough to the point where now in the beginning of my teaching career, I was so committed to public schools that I had pure disdain for private schools or charter schools or any other version of a school unless it was a public school for everybody. And now, as a 53-year-old, 30-plus year educator, I'll take anything. Anything that decides that it wants to try something new, let me see what you try. Because public schools tend not to be quick enough. We're too big. too many systems, too old in its thinking.
It's funny, you seem to be arguing for the collective cumbersome and then indicting it for being too slow.
You hit on why it's so hard to be Mexican. It's exhausting. It's really exhausting. Constant conflict. Ay, Dios mío, what a mess.
Oh my gosh, you are a mess. All right, as we are wrapping up, is there anything coming up in your world?
I do have one thing that I think is really interesting, and that is that we're about to do a follow-up session with one of our districts, a small rural district in Oregon, that used students for back-to-school professional learning with their teachers, where students presented to their teachers. We supported the students to identify the pedagogy that they believe makes the biggest difference for themselves. What do teachers do that help them learn? They identified 7 specific pedagogical practices. They then broke it into small groups, created workshops, and all the staff rotated through their workshops, all led by students, every single one.
I love it. Oh my gosh, think about that.
Because it turns out they actually know what they like.
I think we'll leave it there. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
I'm Jamie Almanzán.
And this is An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast. Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print-inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast.
At the end of every interview that we have for teacher candidates, we will say, "What questions do you have for us?" And they will always ask, "Well, what kind of support can I expect?" And we will always say, "Well, don't worry, we'll give you a mentor." But it's not real mentorship. I mean, it's support with the difficult kid or the field trip form or the grade card, but it isn't coaching. That's where partners like EdConnective step in. They provide observation and feedback with practice. That's real coaching. Their mission is to ensure that every student thrives by facilitating exceptional educator growth. So whether it's science of reading, whether it's leadership development, whether you're trying to build the best recruitment and retention efforts, check out edconnective.com. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? It's kind of a silly question because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech. EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools.